What's up? What's up? I'm Dr. Omatma, host of Egg Meets Sperm. We're busting fertility myths, sharing tangible tips for your fertility journey, and bringing you the most knowledgeable guests to support your journey to parenthood. This podcast is for both women and men because getting fertile as fuck is for both partners, don't you think? Remember, just listening to this podcast won't get you pregnant, but following the tips we share just may. Let's get you fertile AF so that you can co-create the family you dream of. And if your partner's not listening to this, make sure to share this episode with your partner. Hello and welcome to Egg Meets Sperm. My guest today is a dear friend. Her name is Tricia Nelson, and let me tell you about her, you guys. She has lost 50 pounds by identifying and healing the underlying causes of her emotional eating. Tricia spent over 30 years researching the hidden causes of food addiction, and she's an emotional eating expert, author of #1 bestselling book, Heal Your Hunger: 7 Steps to Ending Emotional Eating Now. She's also the host of a very popular podcast, The Heal Your Hunger Show. And oh my gosh, and she's a TEDx speaker. One of my dreams. One day, you guys. She's a highly regarded coach, and she's been featured on The List, NBC, CBS, KTLA, Fox, and Discovery Health. Welcome, Tricia. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Beautiful.
And you are the emotional eating expert. So tell me a little bit about what your journey has been with that, as well as what is emotional eating?
You bet. So I go way back with it. So I think ever since I was a kid, I love to eat. I love to cook. I love to serve food to other people, go out to restaurants. I was just a foodie. I just loved food. Food gave me a lot of excitement. And so it made my life interesting, which wouldn't have been bad, but I gained weight really easily. So like I had this roll on my tummy that I would scrunch up in my hands, like this fat, I would scrunch up in my hands. And I would imagine cutting it off, like you cut fat off the side of a steak, because I felt so mortified by my fat. Like I didn't like it and I couldn't get rid of it because I tried all kinds of things like diets and pills and potions and all exercise programs. I did so many things and nothing worked for me. So I was really frustrated. Other desperate thoughts, I'm like, oh, maybe I'll get a disease or I'll automatically lose weight. So I was sort of at the end of my rope and I felt like nothing's working for me. I had like 5 different sizes of pants in my closet because I never knew what size I would be. I was a yo-yoer, so I would go up and down the scale. And anytime I reached my goal weight, I would bounce up. Like immediately I'd start putting weight back on. So needless to say, I felt really hopeless with it. And what happened was I met somebody who showed me how to deal with the underlying causes, like the emotions that were driving me to eat, that drove that compulsion. Like I had this driving compulsion to eat. So that's why, like, if I dieted, I can only last for a couple of weeks because then this thing, it's like, I call it a monster. Like it would start growing inside of me where it's like, I have to have chocolate. And so, and so eventually I'd be like, screw it, I'm going to eat. And then I'd go back up the scale. So when I was shown a different way that I could get off the diet track, I could basically deal with the underlying causes, because it wasn't really about the food. And that's what I learned, that it made so much sense to me. So I started changing my things that stressed me out, because stress had a lot to do with it. Stress, dealing with my emotions in a more effective way, dealing with communication, like starting to communicate more effectively. So a lot of things that would drive me to eat that seemingly had nothing to do with food. But when I addressed those, like I dug under the symptom of food and weight, everything changed. And so that was my path. And then I spent many years working with my mentor to help other people. And then more recently founded Heal Your Hunger about 5 years ago, so I could help people with my I basically codified everything I learned from my mentor, and I've just been sharing it with other people for a long time now, and it's changing people's relationship with food in a really big way.
Yeah.
You asked me about emotional eating. So a lot of people don't know that they're emotional eaters or what emotional eating is. And I didn't either. So when I first heard that term, emotional eating, my sister actually came home one day, my older sister, she announced, I am an emotional eater. And I didn't like my sister. So I just thought, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. So I'm like, that's really dumb. But I thought everything she said was dumb. But she said it. And even though I sort of sneered at her, I basically started observing my own behaviors. And I started to realize, wow, I'm an emotional eater too. So at first I thought, I just like food. Like, I'm just like, that's stupid. I like food. But my relationship with food was different than my friends. Like, we'd go out to Denny's or something like that. I'm from the Northeast, so it was Friendly's there. And so we'd go out and they'd order like a sandwich and it would come with fries. Well, they'd eat their sandwich and pick up their fries. And I'd look at them and I'd be like, how could you not eat all your French fries? Like, that is sacrilege, And so I would eat my fries and pick up my sandwich. I'd probably eat my sandwich too, but I'm just saying, like, you don't leave fries on the plate. So I started to realize I wasn't, or they'd have hot fudge, right? Yes, 100%. Or they'd order a hot fudge sundae and like halfway through, like those long, tall glasses, halfway through, they'd sort of push it away and go, oh, I'm stuffed. I'd be like, stuffed? What does that have to do with it? Like, you don't leave ice cream and fudge in your thing. So I was realizing that I'm not the same as my friends around food. And then as time went on, I realized I had these binges. Like, I would just overeat in front of the television. I'd start out with my goodies and it was like a good Friday night, good TV, good munchies and ice cream or something. But I just kept going. I just kept eating. And so then I'd feel stuffed and mad at myself and bloated and all this. So I realized not everybody does that either, like eats to where they hurt. So basically, emotional eating is the symptoms of emotional eating are you overeat, like you eat more than you plan to. You eat foods that don't work for you. Like, a lot of people nowadays they have gut issues, they have autoimmune issues that require a specific diet. I'm sure you have clients who need to eat a certain way. But when we know that certain foods cause reactions that are adverse, but we eat those foods anyway, that's a sign of emotional eating. Also, just obsession with food is a sign of emotional eating. Like, you can't stop thinking about food. You can't wait to eat the next something or other. You can't wait to get out of this meeting so you can go cross the street and get your favorite Chinese food or something. So I had a total obsession with food. But the bottom line is emotional eating is eating to basically numb feelings. That's where the emotion part comes in, is like, we eat so we don't feel. We'll feel stuffed, but we don't feel uncomfortable feelings or feelings that we consider intolerable. And it usually starts at a younger age where we sort of learn this behavior. We might have had a painful childhood where things were happening and we just needed to escape our feelings. And so for me, that was the case. And I started young. I started looking to food to soothe me at a very young age. So it starts out as kind of a coping skill. And then it turns into a big, ugly monster in adulthood when you don't need to escape your childhood. You're on your own, but you're in the habit of anything being uncomfortable. Your knee-jerk reaction is, where is there something I can munch on? And it's not conscious. Like, people aren't consciously saying, I'm going to numb these feelings. Like, no, you don't say that. You just obsess about food, and food's like your happy place all the time. So that's pretty much it.
Got it. So when this is happening, we're not aware of it. It's not a conscious decision. Do you find that emotional eaters tend towards a specific type of food, or is it just like all food in general?
Well, so that's a great question. My experience is, if we're looking to anesthetize uncomfortable feelings, to anesthetize pain, well, basically, let me start first by saying, for those who are like, that's crazy, I don't do that, I want to sort of start you off by just thinking about the connection. So we use food for emotional reasons, okay? And so what are the main emotions? I have some sort of umbrella emotions. So I have the PEP test, and PEP is an acronym. And the first P stands for painkiller. So we use food as a painkiller to anesthetize painful emotions. And losing a job, having a parent that's sick, having a kid that's dysregulated, not being able to get pregnant. It's like there's things in life that cause us pain. And so those are the kinds of things we try to anesthetize with food. The E stands for escape. So we want to oftentimes, emotional eaters tend to be overthinkers. So we have very busy minds. And we also worry a lot. Okay. So we tend to skew towards anxiety and nervous energy. And oftentimes we try to escape our brains. We overthink things like, what does she mean by that? Why didn't I get picked? Why isn't so-and-so calling? Or I shouldn't have said that. It's like, it's exhausting being in our heads. And so we eat, we eat to escape our brains. And the last P in PEP stands for punishment. And we often eat to punish ourselves, which seems counterintuitive because we like to eat for reward. Like, I've worked so hard this week. I'm gonna get my favorite Belgian chocolate and watch my favorite TV show or go to a movie with great popcorn. But if we do go overboard, if we tend to eat foods that make us feel sick, or we put on weight from the foods that we eat, it's like, why would you do that to yourself? And begs the question. And my experience is emotional eaters, we're not only overeaters, but we're overfeelers. And we tend to feel guilty about a lot of things. Like, we're really hard on ourselves. And so that's where that sort of internal mechanism of punishment, self-punishment comes in. So painkiller, escape, and punishment, that's kind of the PEP test. Like, it's like, what's going on here? So I share that as a way of just sort of setting up my answer to your question about what are the foods we overeat on. Typically, it's sugar and carbs, or my favorite three food groups: sugar, carbs, and fat. So if you can get them all in one item, like a donut or pastry, all the better. Okay. Cinnamon roll, whatever. So, and the reason is, I believe in part, I mean, first of all, the serotonin hit of carbs, no question, calms us down, sort of slows down our racing brain. But my experience is the heavier the food, the more sedated we feel. So, and it's, again, completely unconscious, but these foods, they calm us down. Like, they calm us down. Carbs calm us down. And sugar is yummy, and it gives us the dopamine hit. It reward center in our brain, and it is highly addictive. So we will keep eating it if we start. Once I started eating sugar, I could not stop. If there was a bag of something, it was sweet, it was going down. Like, I was eating the whole thing. Same with carbs. So we rarely binge on salad, is my point, because salad doesn't anesthetize the feelings. Salad doesn't do the job of killing the pain or helping us check out. It's not going to make us punish ourselves. If you eat salad, it's going to be hard to feel bad. So the heavier the food, the more sedated we are, and also the more we just numb out. And so those are the foods that we tend to binge on.
Yeah. So that's really intriguing. I guess to a certain extent, even I was going to say a lot of people crave like salty foods, like chips and stuff.
Well, salty goes with sweet. So you got to have both. I'm sorry, but they go together like peanut butter and jelly. So there's no question they go together. So salty, yeah, 100%. You can't do sweet all the time. You got to mix them up.
Yeah, I'm usually the chips and salsa person.
Yeah,
like I can binge out on that.
Yep, I get you.
Rarely see me like.
You're not a sweet girl.
Got
it. Yeah, some people pick your poison.
Yeah, and you were like, rarely people crave salads, and I'm like, that's me. Give me a salad.
Well, that's because you're healthy. Like, I do too. But when I used to be in binge mode, it was like the last thing. And people who do struggle with their weight, salads feel like diet food. And so it feels like a punishment or something you can't sustain. And again, that's because of the emotional burden. So when we have a lot of emotions that we're not addressing, we've got to have something to kill that, to bury that. But the more you deal with your emotions in a healthy way, through meditation, through writing them out, talking them out, emotional eaters tend to just stuff their emotions, right? And so they have this turmoil inside, this volcano of emotions that are dying to erupt, but we're trying to pack it down with food. then we're going to crave the heavier foods. But the more emotionally healthy you are and fluid you are, the less you need to stuff things down. And that's when your emotional burden is lighter, then you crave lighter foods.
That's really interesting. So I'm curious, because to a certain extent, I feel like we all have emotional moments, right? Like I can be as healthy as possible and still like a moment of like, I just need that chocolate. I had a hard week, whatever it is. So I recognize that so many of us probably to a certain extent can be more aware of the emotions that we're experiencing and eat the chocolate. It's okay. But do it in a way that's realizing and being in touch with those emotions, right?
Yeah. So there's nothing wrong with liking comfort food. My experience, it's a spectrum. We're all somewhere on the emotional eating spectrum. And I actually have a quiz on my website that'll tell somebody where they are on the emotional eating spectrum. So on the low end is emotional eating. We all do it. We all love a little bit of comfort from food from a hard week. Or someone goes on a cruise and they eat a lot of cheese and drink a lot of wine and they're 5 pounds heavier. When they come home, they're like, oh, I got to do something about this. So they go, this is somebody on the low end of the spectrum. 5 pounds, not a huge consequence. They jog extra, they cut out sweets. In 2 weeks, the 5 pounds are off. That's somebody with a lot of control and very little consequences from their emotional eating. On the high end of the spectrum is food addiction. And that's somebody with a lot of consequences, like it's affecting their health. It's affecting their energy level. It might affect their ability to get pregnant. It's like they don't want to have sex. Okay, so it's affecting them in a lot bigger ways. And also they have very little control. So they can't just course correct like the person who went on a cruise. They can't just pull themselves up by the bootstraps and get on a better track. It's like they try, they promise, and then they're back to the binging. So that's somebody really in the food addiction area. A lot of consequences and very little control. That's where I was. Or once I started eating, I just fell down the rabbit hole. So everybody's in a different place there. And so I recommend people take that quiz and find out where they are on the spectrum of emotional eating. And it's nice to know because then you know what you're dealing with, because somebody who has a lot of control can eat some chocolate or a couple squares of chocolate. Chocolate is not bad for you if you eat a little bit of it. Moderation, right? So moderation is a great thing unless you're on the high end of the spectrum, in which case moderation is almost impossible. I call it the M word. So it doesn't work for people who are more in the food addiction neighborhood, because once they start, it was very hard for me to eat a couple squares of chocolate because I wanted to eat the whole bar of chocolate. It's just, again, the amount of control you have and the amount of consequences you have.
So I'm curious, before we got on and hit record, we were talking a little bit about intuition. And we've had this conversation similarly on your show. So tell me a little bit about intuition and how it plays in with the food that we're choosing for ourselves or not choosing for ourselves.
Yeah. So my experience is that people who are emotional eaters were deep feelers. This is just what I've been researching this issue for 30 years. I've gone through my own healing journey, and my experiences were deep feelers. And that's part of our problem. Not that it's bad to be a deep feeler, but when we don't know how to handle it, we eat to modulate ourselves, to basically control the depth of our feelings, the impact of our feelings. So as deep feelers, we tend to also be highly intuitive or sensitive. And again, there's a double-edged sword. The downfall of being so sensitive is it hurts, like life hurts. In which case we protect ourselves with food and excess weight. Okay. It makes us feel more protected because to be totally unprotected feels painful. So that's very typical for emotional eaters. And so what I teach people to do is not just cover up or run for cover when they have strong emotions, but healthy ways to deal with their emotions so that they can have a bigger container for emotions without flipping out or running to the kitchen. Because to be highly sensitive, there's a lot of pluses to that. You're more in tune with people's energy, like you're compassionate. You pick up on signals that other people ignore. There's a lot of beautiful things. You tend to be more spiritual. You're a seeker. I mean, so many emotional eaters are seekers. They're, first of all, seeking a solution to their problem because diets aren't working for them. So like, how do I get to the bottom of this? But also because we're highly sensitive and we're highly intuitive, we tend to just naturally we're just deeper. Like we want deeper conversation. We crave connection with people. We want to talk about real things. I just used to be so bored by parties where there's just a lot of small talk. I'd be hungry. I'd eat through them because I was so vapid. The conversation was so vapid and I wanted depth. I craved depth, like soul nourishment. I crave soul connections and soul nourishment from those connections. So once a person knows where they are on that spectrum, and knowing if they are emotional eaters on the higher end of the spectrum, knowing we have to get our soul nourishment. I do all my programs in groups because people get so much from each other. We tend to think we're the only ones who've done the crazy things. My TEDx talk, I talk about eating out of the garbage. And it's amazing how many people relate to that story, but they think they're the only ones who have done that. And now they see this woman talking about it in a TEDx talk and they're like, oh my God, I thought I was the only, right? So I thought I was the only one. So we have this sense of isolation and self-blame. But once we connect with each other and see that we're not the only ones, that feeds our soul, that heals us. It heals us on a deeper level. So back to your question about intuition, we're highly intuitive. Intuition is a double-edged sword because you can get a hit on the right steps, next steps to take. This is what happened to me. I'd get a hit and then be like, I'd start arguing with it. I'd be like, oh, no, I don't know. That's scary. I don't want to do that.
I argue with all of my intuitions.
Right? It's like, that can't possibly be.
No, that can't be the right path. And then eventually the universe will make me go down that path.
Exactly. Our higher self, it's like, it can't be avoided. So my experience is that we use food to shut down our intuition. When we are afraid and we don't feel like we have the courage to follow, Spirit tells us what our divine wisdom is guiding us to, we will often eat so we stay unaware. I'm just going to snuff this out with some chips, right? And then boom, I can do whatever I want to do without any recourse, which of course doesn't work out. And the best path is to follow the divine wisdom because my experience is that wisdom, it's spot on, this. And so it's like, the shortest distance to a happy life is just keep listening and doing what we're told, what that wisdom is telling us to do. It's just that takes some practice. It takes practice to trust our inner wisdom. And I think as women, we are highly intuitive, but we haven't strengthened that muscle of trusting our intuition. We can let our head take over.
Yeah. And to a certain extent, like we've been taught that it's not safe. We've been taught that things will go wrong if we listen to our intuition over our head. Right. So there's like so many reasons why we choose to shut down the intuition.
Yep. It is a muscle that has to be exercised. And the more we listen to our intuition and things work out, we're like, oh, there is this divine authority that is spot on, and I am not wrong to listen to it. In fact, that's the best distance and the best track to success is when I do follow my heart. I think following our heart is another way of saying following our intuition. It's like, what am I being guided to? So it takes practice. So much what I do is helping people stop snuffing that out, start listening. And that goes, as I mentioned early on, that goes with communication as well. Start speaking up when we have something to say, because so often we stuff what we have to say as well, because we're like, oh, I don't want to make waves. I don't want to sound au contraire, or who the hell am I to go against the grain? But then we have to keep eating because we have that inspiration. We're not following it. And that has consequences.
Absolutely. So we're almost to time, but I have one more question for you that I'm going to ask. So I heard you mention it in your story, and then you mentioned it again a little later. And that was around diets and why they fail. So can we just talk about that for a couple minutes?
Sure. Oh my gosh. Statistically speaking, it's like 95% roughly of diets that fail. Basically, there was a study, I talked about this in my TEDx talk. There was a study of 22 British Medical Journal did a study, 22,000 people that were on one of 14 popular diets. And by the end of a year, any weight that was lost was regained by a year later. So it is abysmal, the number of diets that don't work. And yet, if you do a search on Amazon, you'll find like, if you put in diet books, you get like 60,000 results. So it's big business. It's like the cards are stacked against you. And my experience is overweight is a symptom of overeating, and overeating is a symptom of what's eating me. And I understand there's physical issues, there's hormonal things, there's medications that cause weight gain. I know there's a few physical and chemical, there's things that happen in our bodies, hormonal, that can keep us from losing weight. But that's a very small percentage compared to it really comes down to emotional eating. Like people don't realize how unconscious our eating habits are. And I think as a nation, we're hungry, but we're not physically hungry. We're emotionally hungry. We are hungry for connection, especially now, right? We've been isolated for so long. So we are hungry emotionally and we're feeding ourselves physically. So if somebody goes on a diet, but they don't dig deeper into why they put on that weight in the first place, if they don't find new ways to nourish themselves on an emotional level, address the emotions and address the stress. Overeaters tend to be overdoers. So we are busy all the time. And that elevates our cortisol, makes us hungry and craving snacky foods. So it's really important that we go beyond just let me change my eating. Because if you take away, for me, the food was a coping mechanism. Like I ate to get through. And if I just take away all my favorite foods on this diet, but those foods are helping me get by, I better have some replacement tools. I better have something else to do in a healthier way to deal with the stress of life. Life is not easy. So I better have new coping tools. Otherwise, I'm going right back to the food, which is what I did time and time again.
So, wow, this is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom.
My pleasure.
I know that you have a gift that you're sharing with our listeners. Can you share a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, well, I'd say I have a lot of things to offer, but the best thing to do, I would like to direct people to the website and to do that quiz. So take that quiz. Also on my website is an opportunity to have an emotional eating breakthrough session. So if somebody hears this talk and is like, oh my God, that is so me, definitely, we want to support you. Go ahead and register for a complimentary breakthrough session. And I have some amazing mentors who would be happy to speak with you and explore with you, like sort of where you're at, your journey, and how we can support you. So that's an opportunity as well. But it's all at healyourhunger.com on my website.
Awesome.
Yeah. And then you were a guest on my show. My show is the Heal Your Hunger show if people want to check it out.
Yes, absolutely. We had a really cool conversation. So if you guys haven't heard it yet, go on over there to check out that conversation.
You bet.
And tune in for the rest of the week for amazing tips from Tricia. I'll see y'all soon. Was that an amazing episode or what? Make sure to check our show notes so that you can link up with our guests. And if you're not a part of our secret Fertile AF community, you can join for free via the link in our show notes. Last but not least, have you showed us some love lately? It would mean the world to us if you could share and review our podcast. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time on Egg Meets Sperm. Peace.